it is my pleasure and honor to be introducing our keynote speaker, Premier Pallister, on behalf of my partners at Deloitte. And I think I was going to say an introduction does say a lot about a person. Thanks, Mark, for that. What the Premier's bio, very brief bio here, says to me, and I'm sure will say to you, is this is an individual who has a deep commitment to serving the public and a very accomplished leader in this country. And so I think we all know Brian Pallister, of course, is the Premier of Manitoba, the leader of the Conservative Party, in Manitoba, and a member of the Legislative Assembly for Fort White. He's a former school teacher and operated a successful financial planning business for 25 years. Brian entered politics in 1992 as an MLA for Portage-La Prairie and became Minister of Government Services in 1995. In 2000, he was also elected as a Member of Parliament, an MP for Portage-Lisgar. During his 8-year tenure as an MP, he served as a parliamentary secretary and as chair of the House of Commons Finance Committee. In July of 2012, Mr. Pallister became leader of Manitoba's PC party. He was elected as MLA for Fort White just 4 months after that. And of course, as we all know, on April 19th, 2016, he became Manitoba's 22nd Premier, with PC candidates winning 40 of 57 seats. After the Premier speaks, I believe he will take a brief Q&A, but please join me in welcoming Premier Pallister.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction, and Mark, thank you for this. I know you're going to enjoy today's events and the discussions around this important topic. To my colleagues, my elected colleagues, and to all of you, I wanted to say it's a privilege to address this topic this morning. I want to start by reminding everybody that we're hosting the second largest sporting event, well, the largest sporting event in Manitoba this summer since the Pan Am Games. So if you haven't got your tickets yet or offered to volunteer, I really want to encourage you. The Canada Games is just an absolutely fabulous event, and it'll be held here this summer. So please make time for that. I also wanted to say that this is the 25th anniversary of something that is particularly personal to my family, which is the 25 years ago this month, we were told that in Portage-La Prairie that we would be saving our Air Force Base. We landed the privatized flight training contract that the military was tendering. And for those of you who don't know my background, I grew up southwest of Portage-La Prairie on a farm there. And the reason I raise this is because it was the Chamber of Commerce, the local Chamber of Commerce, that coordinated the community group that lobbied and worked together to save that base. And so if you aren't a member of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce or the Chamber of Commerce in the community where you live, I encourage you to become a member, and I encourage you to support the organization. And I thank Lauren and his volunteer board and his members for their tremendous efforts on behalf of the small business community in Winnipeg and around the province. Thank you very much. It is approximately the first anniversary of our election, and and talking about learning curves, my colleagues who are here, who I'll ask to stand. Would the MLAs please stand and be acknowledged as well? I know there are a number here. Acknowledge them. A great team of people, and we were talking the other day about learning curves, and someone said, you know, it's not really a curve, it's kind of just vertical. But you do learn as you go through life, and I'm finding in this first year in this position that I'm drawing on the experience, all the experiences I've had in my life in every area, frankly, as a coach, as a community volunteer, as a teacher for a brief time, and in small business, and particularly in sports, I find. And one of the things you learn in all those areas, I think, is you learn that losses are better teachers often than wins. Often you learn more about yourself and your teammates when you're challenged than you do in good times. And there have been some challenging times, certainly in all our lives, and I think if you look back and reflect on where you grew the most, it was often by learning what not to do as much as by learning what to do. And so it is with infrastructure, and I'll begin my comments today by addressing the broader topic of infrastructure. I've been an advocate, as have many in this room, for addressing the infrastructure deficit for a long, long time now, and I think it's important to understand there's a right way and a wrong way to go about doing that. And we can learn by some of the mistakes of the past. So here are just 5 ways to not do infrastructure. First of all, don't overpromise and underdeliver. In our province in the previous 5 years, the budgeted amount in every department was exceeded in terms of spending, except in one, and that was in infrastructure. $2.2 billion was taken out of that department's budget and allocated elsewhere, spent in other things, until the year before the election. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. You can't get the partnership and the trust you need with the industry participants, with the proponents of projects if you do that. We're not doing that. We're going to do infrastructure steadily. We're going to do it on a yearly basis. We've committed to doing more infrastructure investment than any previous government in our history. Secondly, don't parade. Conspicuous consumption's the way to wreck your financial plan, probably the way to destroy your small business, and conspicuous construction isn't any different. Just because a project is shovel-ready doesn't mean it's shovel-worthy. Conspicuous construction's not the way to go. For example, you can rush a quarterback, but don't rush a stadium. Wait for laugh. It's more poignant than funny, isn't it? So don't do infrastructure that way. Don't do it for show. Don't do it by putting up a bunch of signs. Don't do it just weeks before the election. Don't promise to do a bunch of things just before the election, because clearly you didn't do it for other people, you did it for yourself. So don't parade. Thirdly, in honor of a good friend of mine who passed last year, Wilf Tallio, I share with you the 49-to-1 rule. Don't ever forget maintenance. Don't ever forget repairs. If you do your maintenance, it costs you 1/7 as much as if you have to do repairs, which costs you 1/7 as much as if you have to replace. It's a 49-to-1 rule. What we found is that a lot of the repair schedules weren't being adhered to, a lot of the maintenance wasn't getting done, so we're doing a bunch of things now with infrastructure money that don't involve billboards, and they aren't, as some of my friends say, they're not sexy, but they're important. They're important because they'll save you money down the road. I'll give you the example of FleetNet. FleetNet is the emergency communication system for our province. It's how, during an emergency, a frontline healthcare worker, an ambulance worker, or a fire person, police, can communicate with one another. We knew that system, the previous government knew that system was going to be obsolete 8 years ago. Unfortunately, they didn't do anything to fix it or replace it, and so what happened was last year they were buying parts on eBay to keep the system up and running. That's your frontline emergency personnel during a disaster, and parts rubber banded together to keep the system going. That's approximately $500 million we're talking about. So for those of you who are anxious to have your project funded by the government, understand that we'll get to it, but we're going to get to the fundamentals first. And the fundamentals are protect your people when there's an emergency, when there's a disaster, make sure they can communicate with each other for their safety and for the safety of everyone in this province. That is absolutely essential. Do not, and I think this is almost totally ironic that I say this, but in Manitoba, where we buy wholesale, do not fail to shop smart. Ronald Reagan once said the government in Washington, D.C. was spending money like drunken sailors. At least the drunken sailors were spending their own money. Something happens to people when they're spending other people's money sometimes. It hasn't happened to me yet in a quarter of a century of public life, and I don't think it'll happen to my colleagues, but it happens. It happens to lots of people. When they're in charge of spending someone else's money, they don't apply the same fundamental tenets that they apply when they're spending their money. And that's dangerous. the Auditor General's report from 3 years ago, and there is no better name for an Auditor General than Bellringer. Carol Bellringer was the Auditor General. Isn't that a great name? I had a buddy of mine's a teacher in Portage la Prairie, English teacher too, and his name is Mark S.A. Now, I don't know if there's a better name. There's no better name for an English teacher than Mark S.A. Anyway, we won't go there. She commented in her analysis of the government's purchasing practices that untendered contracts were becoming essentially an epidemic. Untendered contracts. What that means is you take somebody else's money and you go and you don't use the free market to get value. I told you. It's ironic telling Manitobans about this. Who would take money from somebody else and go and spend it without shopping? Really? And so we're changing the way we do our contracts. We're doing them more openly. We're doing them transparently. We have greatly reduced the amount of untendered work that we're using your money for. And I think this is just sort of common sense. I would say, too, if you're going to hide the contract, there's a pretty good chance that you shouldn't have given it out in the first place. And finally, don't ever forget that it's not your money. If you've got to buy your friends, they aren't really your friends. So taking other people's money as a government and shopping, well, not shopping, is to me just fundamentally wrong. And taking other people's money and using it to sole source when you could shop, that's wrong. And doing it with a contract which isn't public, that's also wrong. And these are fundamental things you can do. If you ignore all these rules, what you'll do is you may say that you're spending a lot of money on infrastructure, but what you won't be doing is getting value for the money you're spending on infrastructure. So let's not pretend that the amount that's budgeted in any government department is reflective of actual outcomes, because we spend more than virtually every other province on healthcare, and we're 10th in many major categories. Education, we spend a lot. We need to focus on the front line in the classroom, helping the teachers help the kids. We need to focus in every area of government departments on trimming at the top to get better value on the front line. All those governments grow, in particular, they grow well higher up the chart. We need to change that here, and we are. 56 P3 projects totaling over $34 billion have been approved across Canada since 2012. 56 P3 projects totaling over $34 billion have been approved across Canada since 2012. 3 in Manitoba. We're the only province with legislation that basically creates a two-tier infrastructure format, makes it harder for P3s. Now, our government is committed to strategic investment in infrastructure, and it has to maximize value for money, promote economic growth, and generate economic benefits for communities. And that requires a willingness to consider innovative, alternative approaches of meeting our infrastructure needs. What we're talking about today is playing catch-up with the rest of the country. What we're talking about today is not that innovative, quite frankly. But then again, adopting successful applications of other ideas that are used elsewhere is a form of innovation, I suppose. Approaches have to go beyond the typical taxpayer-funded formula. Every government, municipal, provincial, federal, is acutely conscious of the limitations of their resources these days. Other provinces, 6 or so, have balanced their books this budget year, or will. 3 have a serious problem with crude oil price and have pushed themselves down into deficit positions, and Manitoba is the outlier. So we're aware that we need to move towards balance. And every organization I talk with, despite the fact they may be there to talk with me about getting government support of some kind, is also aware of the need for us to move to sustainable money practices in our province, fix our finances, so to speak. To do that, we have to be innovative and recognize that the private sector can play a vital role here. An important role in ensuring Manitobans receive value for money, just as you and your businesses do every day. You provide value for money. One way of doing that is through 3P partnerships. So let's be clear about what a P3 project is and what it is not. A P3 is a contractual arrangement between public and private entities through which the skills, assets, and/or financial resources of both the public and private sectors are allocated in a complementary manner, sharing risks and sharing rewards too. Done properly, P3s can deliver improved services and better value for taxpayers. As well, they can increase the operating efficiencies by making investments in new technologies, bringing innovative solutions, encouraging more, not less, but more transparency. P3s require governments to think and to behave in new ways that require new approaches and skills, but that can help drive broader economic and business climate reforms. So, for example, P3s can be a tool for increasing competition or reforming procurement and public service delivery. A successful P3 is more than just a one-off financial transaction with the private sector. It must be based on a firm policy foundation, a long-term political commitment, and a sound and predictable environment. In order to create that foundation, we are going to be repealing the 2012 Public-Private Partnerships Transparency and Accountability Act. This legislation has been tabled for repeal. It'll be passed in the next 5 weeks. We're the only province in Canada that has placed onerous and additional requirements on public-private partnerships, with the result that we're at the tail end of using them as a tool in our province. We are moving towards a more strategic, transparent, and accountable capital plan for all our infrastructure projects that utilizes evidence-based decision-making and delivers value for money. Now, the new Manitoba Strategic Capital Infrastructure Plan is going to be the framework within which our government will review all future capital projects. It's an evidence-based process, and it will assess projects based on return on investment, value for money, and economic, community, and social benefits. Our return on investment component is an adaptable, made in Manitoba, value for money analytical tool that incorporates financial, socioeconomic, environmental, innovation, needs assessments, land use planning, community impact and usage, employment and job creation, as well as operating and maintenance costs. One thing it leaves out is how many votes is in it for us. That's not one of the criteria, which will put us ahead of most of our fellow competitors, frankly, across the province, and country, I should say. The value for money component includes an analysis that evaluates alternative construction methodologies, as well as the life cycle costs and performance of the asset over the lifetime of the project. Again, this process will take the politics out of infrastructure. Strategic investment should mean real jobs. By depoliticizing the process, we can replace the partisan interest with the public interest. With that framework in mind, I am pleased to announce that following a lengthy review of the success experienced in Saskatchewan related to their P3 procurement, our government is considering a similar delivery model for the Manitoba New Schools project. Later today, a request for proposals will be issued for a public-private partnership business case and financial advisory services for Manitoba schools. We have identified 4 new schools that are required in order to meet enrollment and growth pressures in 4 school divisions across Manitoba. These schools were prioritized, and the first phase of the initial P3 project assessment was completed as part of our capital planning processes. The schools will be owned by their respective school divisions, school boards, and they will deliver education in the same manner as all other schools within the board's jurisdiction. Each of the new schools will be targeted to attain a leadership in energy and environmental design gold standard, and they will be designed to accommodate a child care center with 20 infant spaces and 54 preschool spaces. In order to meet the urgent need for these new schools, the deadline for RFP submissions is June 15th, 2017, with the contract to begin August 1st, 2017. Manitobans elected our government just a year ago to fix the finances, to repair the services, to rebuild the economy. They expected us to get value for their tax dollars, and we are making progress, but we cannot be bound by the ways of the past. We have a duty to consider new ideas that can deliver better value for Manitobans in the future. Public-private partnerships may, in some circumstances, deliver more and better infrastructure at a lower price. And that is why our government is adopting a project evaluation framework that includes P3s as an option. Across Canada, governments of all different political stripes are utilizing P3s. This isn't so much an ideological thing as it is a practical matter. This is arguably a key part of the future of how we do infrastructure investments in our country and in our province. This is how Manitobans get more value for their hard-earned tax dollars. This is how we ensure that the only thing better than today in Manitoba is tomorrow in Manitoba. Thank you for having me.